Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and today let's go back to a topic that we have discussed before because I personally find myself a little confused. I'm not quite clear that I've got it all. I know I don't have it all. And I want to see if I can make a little progress toward understanding the developments that have come out of a project to disperse iron salts into the atmosphere as a way of reducing climate change by sort of knocking the methane out of the air. I think oxidizing the methane, or I don't know. Chemically, I'm a total infant, but they'll straighten me out a little bit. So today we're going to go rejoin a conversation that has been sort of going on for the last year or so in some of these shows. And the fine people who are joining me here are going to help me get a little clarity about some of the developments, the avant-garde research and progress on climate repair. Okay, let me start with, I think I'm going to introduce Peter Fikowski first because he's such a reliable standby that it's like he's on my show half the time, and he's always such a breath of fresh air and encouragement to everybody else. That I'm so glad to have you with me, Peter.
Thank you.
And I think you're in London, are you not, Clive Ellsworth?
Yes.
Clive and Franz Oeste are partners in crime, I think. You're developing several new advanced ideas about how to remove methane from the atmosphere, which is a very noble cause. But you keep moving forward, and some other people don't want to go where you're going. And so I want to get clarity about that. Clive is, when he's not doing things about climate, which is, he's doing things about climate all the time, but he is also a software man. And I think he teaches people how to do various software projects. And Francois is I guess you'd say, a chemical
Engineer.
engineer.
Yeah.
Engineer. He's in Germany, and he and Clive tend to be working together on new and different things, and he gives us all almost every time I talk to him, he has a new breakthrough. So I want to get clear about this. As I understand it, a couple of years ago, I was in touch with Renaud de Richter and I think Franz, and you were working on developing iron salt aerosols. And the idea is you're going to put up a tower on an island someplace in the tropics, and you were going to spray this iron salt into the atmosphere. Now, don't give me your chemical explanations anymore because I can't absorb them. So all I want to know is the game plan. What's happened to the whole strategy? Later on, I think you changed it, and you weren't going to spray it from a tower. You're going to maybe out of airplanes or something. And okay. And then there was a problem with the iron salt because iron discolors snow if it falls. So if you want to knock the methane out of the air in the Arctic or Antarctic, you would discolor the snow and make it less reflective, and therefore that would warm the planet instead of doing what we want to do, which is cooling the planet. So you suggested something like titanium, which is white color, and if it falls on the snow, it will do the same thing much as the iron salt, but but it will not discolor the snow or ice. And okay, I absorbed that much. And then now we've gone beyond that, and we're into a whole new ball game with different chemicals and different game plan altogether. Now, that was, I think, some of the people you were your playmates 2 years ago, your teammates, are not necessarily going along with all your new innovations, but they still stick by the idea of iron salt and may want to, I don't know whether there's a dispute or not. I just have the feeling that you guys are kind of easing apart in some way, and that I don't understand because it's never been made explicit to me. Okay, that's all I know is I want to get straightened out. Don't give me any chemicals. I just can't understand them. Adele Buckley is a dear friend of mine who's a physicist and engineer, and she will be with us. I like to bring her on because she asks critical questions. She always asks hard questions that I couldn't think of. And Adele is just got home from the hospital having her knee replaced. So, but she's up for this, I think. No question. Okay, I'm going to ask Peter whether I have already muddied the waters, or if you can straighten me out. Let's get started.
Yeah, so I like to start these things out from the very beginning, which is why do we even care?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Right? Because we've been talking about climate since I was a teenager. And why we care, of course, is we want to give our children a safe climate like we were given. So now, the UN isn't convinced of that yet, right? The UN wants to reduce emissions, which doesn't have much impact on CO2 levels. But organizations change slowly, much more slowly than people do. People are very clear. We want to give our children a safe climate. So the CO2 is a critical issue, and we discuss that. We talk about ocean fertilization. We talk about all sorts of other things.
And we'll come back another time soon to talk more about ocean fertilization. So that's not over either.
Exactly. It's not over. But we're making phenomenal progress there. Once you accept the fact that somehow or another we're going to restore CO2, then methane becomes urgent. Because if we restore CO2, but we don't do anything about methane, then there's...
Well, hold on. What are you talking about? Restoring CO2?
If we... if given our goal of
restoring the levels of CO2 to a pre-industrial period.
Yes.
Oh, I thought you meant we're going to go get some lot of CO2 and put it out there to restore it.
Just the opposite, the exact opposite. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And so we restore safe CO2 levels. Then methane is very urgent because we have it has a significant impact right now. Some say mathematically it's 20%, but if you put on your public relations hat, you can say 30 or 40%. But more importantly, there's a melting permafrost, which could cause a methane burst. And last time that happened, our planet lost about a third of its species. If that were to happen again, that would be terrible, to put it mildly. And
by the way, this is a side comment, but I think it's worth putting in here, because on this HPAC web page, or it's like a listserv, people last week were posting stuff about some new burst of methane that was extraordinary off the Laptev Sea in the Arctic, the Siberian waters, and like they think it might have been some sort of burst from under the ocean from methane that had been held down. Do you have any further information about that?
No, I didn't read those articles. I read them in 2019, which is now 5 years ago, and that was what instigated this whole the bringing this to fruition. And so I don't imagine that it's that different now than it was in 2019, just 5 years worse. So
no, but it was a sudden thing. It was like an overnight.
Yeah. And that's the nature of a burst. But in any case, whether it's now or whether it's 20 years from now, most of us feel obligated to insure our children and grandchildren against that eventuality. As my brother would say, how embarrassed would you feel if it did happen and you hadn't actually taken the precautions that we knew is possible to prevent it?
Well, they can already be mad at us, no question. I mean, I have no
Anyway.
grandchildren, but everybody who criticizes me for not having fixed this, I have to say, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Anyway, Adele, you got your hand up. What's your?
Well, every now and then I've imagined that some of these huge methane bursts from the sea could be harvested as natural gas and used in some way or other. Does anyone talk about that? Is it conceivable there would be a way of catching this methane?
It's conceivable. It's been discussed. The late Salter, Stephen Salter, put together a nice plan that I analyzed with him. The problem is it's nearly impossible. It's conceptually possible, but the distances and the weather and the politics and the economics make it, each of them is like, well, you could be lucky on the politics, you could be lucky on the economics, you could be lucky with the weather, you could be, it's like once you multiply all those probabilities, you come out to like a 2% chance that it might succeed.
Yeah, well, so that's what I sort of thought you were going to say, but I wanted to hear it.
Yeah. There's lots of natural gas coming out in where there are oil fields all over the USA, and there's no pipeline. They could easily capture it, but there's no pipeline. It's too expensive to ship it somewhere else, so they just burn it.
Yeah.
So if they're doing that on land in the USA, I don't think they're going to go to the Arctic and capture it from there.
Right. Yeah.
Well, at least I hope they at least burn it, because if they just let it out, it's a lot worse than if they burn it, right? We don't want if you burn it and it turns into CO2 and water, and we don't like the CO2, but we'd sure rather have that than the methane itself, which is like 30 times worse or something, right?
We would be happy if the burning would be 100%, but it's only 70 or 80 max.
Right.
Yeah. So there's lots of disused wells that leak gas. That's just a little bit of gas, but I think it's about 1 million of them. I mean, it's at least
let's get back to methane removal.
Yeah.
So the context you can hear in the discussion. The context really is, how do we prevent a fatal methane burst? That's the critical thing. And what we realized is that as we looked at Stephen Salter's plan, I could go into detail. It's just delightful. I hope you had a chance to meet Stephen Salter. But economically and politically not practical. We looked at lots of these ideas, and the only thing that had a good chance of scaling is the method that Franz introduced in 2017, which is methane oxidation. And whether that's done with iron chloride or titanium dioxide. I have someone else who's working with hydrochlorous acid, HOCl. It doesn't matter what the material is. It's economically viable. Any way you do it, it's economically viable. And so the limiting factor right now is, in order to do it, we have to agree on a goal. And who agrees on the goal is not clear. But there's at least 5 of us, I think, right now, who agree that we want to give our children a safe climate. As I said, eventually the UN will, but there's no predicting when that will happen. But we need enough people to agree on the goal. And I think we've got quite a few dozen, maybe even 100, maybe 200 people agreeing on the goal to a safe climate. We need to have governance. And right now, that's my main focus, is that unless there's some sort of intergovernmental organization, which is saying, okay, if at least a few of us want a safe climate, and here are the measures how we know we do it, and we'll make sure that if anyone else who wants to play in the game of restoring a safe climate, here are the rules of the game. And so we're working to get that assembled. Right now, I think we can get MIT to convene it. Just beginning stages of that.
Wait a minute, hold on. Get MIT to convene what?
Some sort of, we call it a climate restoration, safety, and governance board or organization. And so it would essentially be something intergovernmental, but include, where people say, most people aren't yet concerned about restoring a safe climate. They think it's impossible, presumably. But those of us who know the physics realize, oh, we could actually do it, and we're gonna make sure that actually happens.
Okay.
So, but without that, the large funders can't come in, right? Because the large funders can't be seen as trying to direct the world to save it for our children, because it'll be looked at as evil. So there has to be the governance first. And so, and that's beginning to come together now. Huge appreciation to MIT, which established their mission for restoring the atmosphere at the beginning of this year. Okay. And so, and that's become a leadership thing. It's like, oh, if MIT has a mission to restore the atmosphere, then maybe we can too. The final, so we have a goal, we have governance beginning to happen. Funding, we've established the funding has to come from people who are interested in a safe climate for our grandchildren, our common grandchildren. And traditionally we look to the government, but the government doesn't have children. The government has to take care of water supply, potholes, wars, it's stuff like that, roads, and the government cannot afford to restore the climate. It doesn't get votes. And the same with corporations, like Microsoft is putting money in, but Microsoft's owners, the shareholders, they invest in Microsoft to retire. And I'm sure some of my funds have Microsoft stock, and I want them to grow so I can retire. Thank you very much. I'm going to do my own climate restoration work independent of Microsoft. My point is that expecting corporations to do meaningful work to restore the climate for people who have nothing to do with them, most of whom aren't even born, it's ludicrous. On the other hand, us gray hairs and white hairs, that's all we're here for. And so we're the natural long-term funding for anything that's done. And so, and that's coming together. We've established our small grandparents fund. I have a colleague in the Middle East who's organizing a large scale one. I call it from funding from families and family offices. There's actually a lot of funding available, and we're beginning to organize now so that the billion or 10 or $100 billion a year will be available for doing restoration. So with all of the background in place, so we have a goal, we have governance coming together thanks to MIT, we have finance beginning to get together thanks to these folks in the Middle East. I can't name anyone because it's all very early stage, but everyone involved is just lit up. Like, oh, thank God, I've wanted to do this my whole life. I can't believe that the fate is putting me in charge of this aspect of it. So then we get down to the tech. So once we have the goal, the governance, the funding, how are we going to do it? And so that's
what are we going to do?
Yeah. We know that nature removes methane continuously, mostly through OH radicals oxidizing it, just like when you turn your stove on, that's methane, and you have a flame that oxidizes it, then OH radicals, hydroxyl radicals, and chlorine radicals will also oxidize it molecule by molecule. And I think everyone agrees that's what we're going to end up doing. And then the question then is, how do we most efficiently get the OH radicals and the chlorine radicals in the atmosphere?
I really want you to give me some names and actual facts about whether or not, did I mess it up when I described what I think
no,
I'm
you didn't mess it up.
perceiving as a cleavage or something in the movement of people who were all doing this on the same page? You're not quite on the same page now. Who's going where?
Yeah.
And how are you departing from each other? And are you still friends?
Yeah, we're all still friends.
Yes.
And we're very grateful to, I mean, Peter, when I approached him, I don't know how long was it, 3 years ago or something, Peter, and told him about iron salt aerosol, and he took to it immediately, and he funded. We were looking for a small amount of funding. Well, not for us, it would have been a lot for research at Copenhagen University, and Peter came up with that funding. So we know Peter very well. We've had a lot of meetings, very regular meetings with Peter, and he's an amazing climate leader. And Franz is an amazing, extraordinary technology person, but his first kind of love is nature. But chemistry, but deep chemistry as well. How does nature work from a chemistry point of view? And so can that be mimicked safely? The way that nature, because if nature's doing it okay and we're all still here, then maybe that same mechanism, it's often very, very low concentrations, really small amounts. And as Peter said, methane goes away slowly in the air. It burns very quickly, of course, on a stove, but it's a very, very slow burn in the air because of these radicals that form, naturally in the air. But this methane slow burns. It burns a little bit quick, faster in some places and a little bit slower in other places. So we're interested in the place it burns a little bit faster. And that looks as though it could be clouds. So what Franz identified and predicted 25 years ago, was that it's the iron in mineral dust. There's a certain chemistry, this forms, iron chloride, that produces, in this case, chlorine radicals that do this slow burn of methane around it. And we formed a group, and Peter came along and helped with funding for research, and Oswald, around about the same time, Oswald came along, and he loved the idea as well, and then he was successful in getting funding from, I think it's Carbon Fix, for his company, and we're all interested in that company and want it to succeed. AMR, it's called AMR, atmospheric methane removal. But of course, Franz is always coming up with new ideas. He's always reading the latest papers. He can be hard to keep up with, believe me. And we started to say to Oswald, hey, you know what, we've got some new ideas. It'd work better if you do it like this. And he said, oh, it's very interesting, very interesting. And then maybe a month later, we'd say, hey, we've got even better ideas. And he said, look, I've made a business plan. I've got a research, I've got a whole program in place. I can't keep changing it, every month or so, or every time you come up with a new idea. I need to stick to the plan. Now, we still think iron-free chloride, it worked millions of years ago. It still works today. It would work. It's going to work if Oswald uses it. I don't like to use spraying into the air, because it makes it sound like it's an awful lot. It's really small amounts that need to spread very widely and then do this slow burn process, because it works like a catalyst. Small amount has a big effect over time. It works in a kind of a gentle way. Because I think people get afraid when you talk about spraying some kind of chemical into the air. So he but his change recently has been, he's been thinking about how does it spread in the air. Originally he thought about putting it from a tower, And we didn't. So it's difficult to know this stuff unless you're a meteorologist or unless you've got skills in the way that air spreads around. And so we've been learning more about meteorology and the movement of air and how, clouds. It's all very complicated. Meteorologists, I mean, that's a whole discipline in itself. So he's talking about aircraft now, and we were recommending aircraft for the Arctic. I think we still would recommend an aircraft if we get them. If there's a methane burst, titanium. There's various titanium compounds. Once again, titanium occurs naturally, of course, in the environment. It's highly photosensitive, so you need about. Again, we don't know until there's somebody comes up with some money for tests. We think about 10% the amount of material to have the same effect, because it's more photosensitive than iron chloride, but it doesn't fertilize the growth of moss and red algae and all this kind of stuff. That's when the ice gets warm enough, and when you've got a little bit of sun in the summer, you get this growth, and it accelerates the ice melt. So we don't want iron. It wouldn't discolor it much in itself because it's such a small amount, but it is enough to encourage the growth of moss, lovely life, but not where we want it. We'd like moss to grow on land and algae to grow in the sea, not on the ice. So we'd want to use aircraft. We need to use aircraft there if that should happen. But much better if people can get their skates on and get the funding available and engage brain to have much more cooling, where people are really starting to die in the street because it's too hot. 52 degrees we've had this year in various places. I mean, that's with the amount of water vapor, you can't lose heat. You just die of heat exhaustion. That's starting to happen now, as was predicted long ago, of course. To have the tropics cooled, the oceans cooled, it sounds big. Some of these very wealthy people say, look, you're playing God. It's too much. But, if you do the physics and do the calculations, it can be done. It can be done. This is what Stephen Salter talked about all the time with clouds. Brightening clouds has a big effect. Clouds already reflect an enormous amount of heat away, reflect it back out to space. And so it doesn't take much of a change to cloud cover to make quite a big difference, especially because the oceans are dark, clouds are white, this kind of stuff. So we haven't fallen out with Oswald. I don't tend to go to his meetings much. I'm too busy. But Franz will have to speak for himself. But as I understand it, Franz has been still going along to Oswald's regular meetings to help him.
I help him also.
But my question is, give me a rough estimate of when it will be possible to do it on a wide scale. I mean, I'm thinking of things like 15, 20 years is what I've heard other people say, which is too long before you can do something that really cools the planet.
Iron chloride is a good way to go because that's been tested enough now. We could actually get it going in 3 years, and by 2030, if we wanted to, we could get methane back to safe levels, back below 1 part per million. And then anytime the methane burst got serious, we could roughly double the rate of aerosols and then protect ourselves from a methane burst. So that could be done this decade. Yeah.
Diggity.
Yeah, exactly. And the cost is somewhere in the 1 billion. One of my colleagues says, call it $15 billion a year. Either one of those is negligible in the global budget.
Okay.
And then which aerosol, and so the question I was going to ask was just to confirm with Clive and Franz that I think everybody agrees that the way to go is with an aerosol. And then the question is which aerosol when, and it's like, for me, I sort of roll my eyes. So sort of like, do I want to put which seasoning do I want to put on my mashed potatoes? It's like, fine. any of them are fine. Thank you.
When we tried to find out the way how to whiten clouds to get the very small particles which are necessary for that, then we came to the idea the clouds by itself deplete methane. cloud whitening, and the smaller the particles in the clouds are, the better, the more methane they begin to deplete, because every cloud droplet produces OH radicals. That's a new thing. And the smaller the cloud droplets are, the more OH radicals they produce. So the clouds are the product of OH radicals, are hydrogen peroxide, which also in the sunshine goes to OH radicals. And if a OH radical meets a chloride ion, it transforms it to a chlorine radical also, which works more than 30 times faster with methane than OH radicals itself. And this is our new thing, making white clouds from the gas phase. And we can use only sodium chloride, the salt, which is contained in seawater in huge amounts. So, and sodium chloride isn't in any way poisonous. We can accelerate this process even by giving small amounts of iron as a co-catalyst. It works very well. And we came to this idea because in the Stanford lab, they found out that these small droplets produce these OH radicals. And in Lyon, in the University of Lyon, they found out that the same process happens in condensing very small droplets. And cloud whitening makes very small droplets. And you can make it by a very small amount of aerosol. For a cubic kilometer of air, you need only 10 grams. And a cubic kilometer of air is 1 billion cubic meters. But these particles must smaller than 50 nanometer. They are the best are they between 10 nanometers and 35 nanometers. And
is that hard? Franz, is it hard to smash salt into particles that small, or is that important?
You evaporate a small amount of salt, of sodium chloride, and this can easily be done in a flame or in an arc, for instance. That was Clive's idea, to do it in arcs.
Plasma arc.
In a plasma arc, yes.
Interesting. I hadn't heard that.
Oh, that's our latest, Peter.
Our latest and our best, I must say.
Yeah.
So you're saying that if you just brighten the clouds, and even then you could add a little salt, and that's not essential, but just brighten the clouds with salt, the way Salter wanted us to do it all along, it would do more than Salter himself realized. It would actually not only reduce, reflect sunlight back into space, but it would reduce methane. Right?
Yeah,
and
right.
to make white clouds and make the reflection also.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it'll kill two birds with one stone.
Yes, that's a nice thing.
Metaphor.
Yeah.
Okay, so everybody should get on board with this. It sounds like what we were already working toward anyway, right? How's that different from what Salter, he's been gone now, 6 months? Poor man, I love a friend. But that's just what he was up to all along, right? It's not even, you're not doing anything new and different, particularly.
We told him, we said, we've realized that what you're trying to do does what we want to do as well. It removes methane. He was delighted to hear that.
Oh, and he knew.
He knew. We told him.
Oh.
Yeah. And he offered us help from in his spray tunnel to do physical tests. So we're talking to those people as well.
Wonderful. Okay. So what's the problem now? Where do things stand that there's a disparity?
There are people we talk about on our HPAC group. I'm sure you'll have seen them, Meta, as well. What one of the guys is calling the NUA sayers, the non-use agreement, NUA. People who say, do not do any cooling of the planet. Do not do any climate intervention. The only thing you should do is reduce emissions. And as I see it, and many of us in the HPAC see that, is what they're really saying is they're signing the death warrant. It's of even more ecosystems. When we're already losing huge amounts of coral, we've already lost thousands of miles of underwater kelp forests, and it's just going to keep getting worse and worse. So it's like the very ill patient. It's like denying treatment to a very ill patient.
Okay, look, I think we're all agreed that those are the bad guys. We're all against them. These people
but these people say
they're good people who are really not accepting and really realizing what everybody should know by now. But what I'm asking is you and your friend Oswald, and I don't know who else, because he's got a team now working on doing
that's great.
He's iron salt aerosol, and you've given up on that. You don't think that's as effective as what Franz has been just describing, right?
Well, not his particular approach, but we want to use iron with our salt. We want a little bit of iron because it makes it work better in the clouds. Okay. Because iron is also a catalyst. So it's a slightly different. It's a different approach, but it's not saying his is wrong or won't work. Mm-hmm. We're looking for the most efficient way of doing it. Okay. We want someone to come along and say, yeah, we'll fund this more efficient way, but you should still try different things.
Meta, I think the question you're asking is, what's the barrier at this point? Mm-hmm. And Clive started addressing it, that there are people who roll their eyes and say, we're just making it worse, let's just stop. And so I interpret that as saying the barrier is resignation when people don't even realize they're resigned. Mm-hmm. And so on the HPAC group, I keep reminding people, nature has removed the CO2. It's gotten CO2 down very rapidly. And there's no reason we can't do the same when we decide we want to. But people are so resigned about reducing CO2 levels that they can't imagine that it's even possible, that Peter Fikowski and the other people must be crazy. And so there's a strong resignation, which then shows up in the anti-geoengineering people who say, oh my God, there's so much argument, just stop. But everyone's on the same page. I talked to Clive was with me in Rome when we had the founder of ETC group there. And he was totally in favor of restoring the climate. He just wanted to make sure it was done ethically and legally. Mm-hmm. Well, of course. Mm. Anyway, so that's the main barrier, is the resignation. And so
that's maybe why you mentioned MIT is taking some initiative. Yeah. That would be important, to have somebody give you a seal of approval, Yeah. Stick on a little accepted label, and that might make a difference. Especially if it's MIT, because I think at least most scientists who oppose any geoengineering, as they put it, would still say, well, MIT is a good place. They know what they're doing, and so it'd be good to have a good label. Yeah.
Yes. I evoked agreement that we want to focus on aerosol. Let me narrow it down a little more, Franz and Clive. I think we want to focus on aerosol in the dry parts of the climate, dry parts of the planet, where there's little precipitation, because the main cost is going to be rain. And so if you do this in places it doesn't rain, then the cost goes way down.
As we see it, there's a cost to iron 3 chloride using ferric chloride. Salt is dirt cheap. Common salt is very, very cheap by the ton. It's much, much cheaper. And that making that vaporizing it and making it into nanoparticles that make the brightest clouds that then produce does the methane removal and reflects away sunshine. What we're looking at is how to really cool the oceans, not just remove methane, work the way nature works. I mean, people like to say, look, it should just do one thing. It should just remove methane. We don't want it doing anything else. And we say, look, but nature doesn't work that way. Nature does several things at the same time. If you mimic nature, unfortunately, it means you've got more to study. You've got to learn about the chemistry of methane removal. You've also got to learn about cloud formation. Well,
this is a good topic, Clive.
Yeah.
And you're an entrepreneur as well, but as an entrepreneur, when it comes to raising funds, investor or a donor wants a specific outcome. So although you can do all 2 or 3 for one, when you're selling it to your sponsor, you want to say, okay, your work is going to get this done. So just that's the main disagreement there. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Franz wants to speak.
The interesting thing is what we learned. If you can make clouds white, you can also make clouds faster rain out by making them not so white, by making them more gray. You can manipulate clouds in any way. You can that they can live longer. If they are very white, they live longer and rain not so fast out. But you can do the opposite and let them rain out.
I mean, if you have white clouds, wouldn't the whole game plan be try to keep them as white as long as you can?
There are areas on this planet which need rain.
I see.
I think the contrast between the work that Clive and Franz do and what I do, they're harmonious. My focus is how do we get the governance and the funding, because it's clear we have the technology. It's clear that every 6 months we'll improve the technology, but we just have to remind the funders and the governance people, we have the technology, let's get going developing it. Mm-hmm. And then thank God Franz and Clive are actually developing the new ideas, even when the old ideas are just fine. Thank you very much.
Are you hanging out more with Oswald or not?
I talk with him. We're all doing the same thing. We all have different perspectives doing the same thing.
Well, now tell me, how does this connect with ocean fertilization? Because there's even some overlap there in these approaches. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Go ahead, Clive.
Can somebody explain that whole technology in 30 words or less?
Okay. Well, the ocean needs iron. So the ocean, the phytoplankton, the little algae that grow all over in the ocean and give us the oxygen, they're crying out for more iron. This is naturally the case. It's how it's always been. You've got to be careful. Don't give them too much because you get a bloom. It just gets too much and then it all goes stinky. But the oceans are absolutely vast. What we think is would work great is to have iron salt aerosol going into the clouds, spreading wide, getting rained out. So it's really, really diffuse, very small fertilization, a small increase over a vast area. And places like the Southern Ocean, which has got virtually no iron at all, none. So, well, that's not true to say none, but it's much lower, even lower in the Southern Ocean. And so CO2 comes bubbling out of the ocean. That adds to CO2 in the atmosphere. Comes bubbling out of the ocean. If you have a little bit more phytoplankton.
Why? Hold on. Because there's no iron in the Southern Ocean, the CO2 is coming out. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It comes down to chemistry again.
Right.
But phytoplankton in the green algae in the ocean, they absorb CO2 from the ocean. If you have hardly any phytoplankton in an area, then there's always a little bit of CO2 in the water. There's always a little bit, and it bubbles out. Some parts of the ocean, some parts CO2 goes in, other parts it comes out. A lot comes out in the Southern Ocean.
Ah,
So it
okay.
had a little bit more phytoplankton. Would instead of it bubbling out, well, it doesn't exactly bubble out, but it comes out anyway. It sort of diffuses out of the water. It would prevent that. It would block that to some extent. Maybe depending on how much iron is allowed to be,
Mhm.
how much iron just falls out in the rain. I mean, you could taste it. You wouldn't taste any difference. To measure it, it'd be very difficult to measure the increase, but there would be a very, very slight increase, of iron in the raindrops. Very, very slight. And it would have, because iron is a micronutrient. Phytoplankton need very, very small, but they must have some. It's like we have iron. All life needs iron. We have iron in our blood and in our bodies. It's a vitally important element for body chemistry. And plants are the same. They must have a little bit of iron. Not much, but some. And if the iron is so low, and especially in the Southern Ocean, for reasons Franz has proposed, but let's not go into that now. But so low that adding just a tiny bit of iron where it's so low can make quite a noticeable difference over a wide area, if it's done in a diffuse way. So
Are you saying this would be a good place to do any additional iron that you want to put into your marine cloud brightening? If you're going to add any iron, a good place to do it would be the Southern Ocean. Assuming, if I'm understanding you correctly, and then that would assume that the clouds that you produce in the Southern Ocean are as effective in every other way as clouds that you might produce someplace else. I think my own thinking is you would want to, and here's where Adele and I disagree. I think the most important place to brighten clouds would be the poles, especially the North Pole, because we want to keep that ice from melting, and we want to refreeze it if possible.
Yeah, in the summer months, that is. You only want to brighten them in about 2 or 3 months during the summer when the sun is melting the ice. In the winter, it's completely dark in the poles.
No, yeah, you couldn't anyway. You couldn't use that technique anyway. Yeah. So you could do it. Let's say if you spend all your ships, send them up to the Arctic for the few months, and then send them to the Southern Ocean for the rest of the time to brighten clouds there. Is that and sprinkle a little bit of iron?
Yeah.
Is that?
But if you cool the tropics and the subtropics, you also cool the Arctic and the poles.
Yeah,
that's what Adele wants to say. She's got her hand up, so say it, Adele. I know what you're going to say.
No, I wasn't going to talk about the Arctic, but yes, I think it's much better to work in places that are easy to work in, amongst many other reasons why the Arctic isn't the best place to start out these processes. What is happening to the Great Barrier Reef? Because I understand that they are doing some of these cloud experiments there.
Good point.
I haven't seen any news recently.
No, no impact. They need to do more research, but it's difficult.
I had this guy from Israel, I've forgotten his name, on a few months ago, and
Danny Rosenfeld.
Yeah, Danny, and he was reporting on his visit to and experimentation there, but he wasn't really saying much. I think he actually they may have some news to report, but it's still embargoed or so, at least at that point. So we don't know what's going on there, really, Adele.
As far as I know, they use the classic method of nebulizing seawater to brighten clouds. And this kind of method makes 2 big droplets, and they are not so good for cloud brightening.
Yeah.
Well, Stephen Salter was always talking about the real challenge is getting the right size of these particles, and nobody's done it yet. And he was, if he had any criticism of the Great Barrier Reef experimentation, it was that they still don't have the right size particles.
Right, it's difficult, and Clive is going to get a Nobel Prize for his arc lamp or whatever it is. But I just want to go back to the CO2 removal. I've got this great map produced by the NASA Orbiting Carbon Observatory back in 2014, just after it was launched, and they averaged 6 weeks of CO2 levels. And what's very interesting is blue is low CO2, red is high CO2. And so you could see in the late summer and middle fall that presumably there were fires burning in the Amazon and in Africa, and presumably, I don't know what was going on in China here. But I guess there's always industry going on in southern China.
Yeah.
But in the Antarctic, you can see the blue areas where you're getting natural CO2 removal.
Yeah.
And this is why people are very interested in doing work in the Southern Ocean, because that's where you can see the biggest impact of nature. As Adele said, the ocean there is treacherous. You have the roaring 40s and the furious 50s, and I forget what they call it, just as you go farther south in latitude. We're working in the Philippines, where you can see there's a little bit of iron removal happening in the South China Sea, but that's where, after Mount Pinatubo erupted, that there was a 20 gigaton removal of CO2. And so we're thinking that the best thing to do is to follow nature and reproduce what actually happened in 1991 and 92, because nature already did it. Anyway, so just useful about the Southern Ocean. And I'll let us continue. So the question of iron, the iron from the iron salt aerosol can make a difference. The problem is that to really remove CO2, you need to have enough iron to get above certain thresholds. If you don't have enough, you really don't produce significantly more phytoplankton. Because if you think about it, the phytoplankton need to have a concentration high enough that it can get through cell membranes, or something like that. It's more. I'm sure it's more complicated than that. But if the concentration is below that, even if you double it, it's still below that critical level, it won't make a difference. In almost all of the ocean, the amount of iron from iron salt aerosol is probably going to be below that critical level. And there will be some places where it's above, but then the next critical thing seems to be doing the iron fertilization in a downwelling eddy, where it's spinning around, and then due to the rotation of the earth, it actually causes the water to go downwards. And doing it there seems to make all the difference in terms of long-term carbon removal. But of course, you can't control that with a cloud of aerosols.
But now let me see if I understand. You want to go to eddies because water is going down there, and
Yes.
you put some iron in, and that's going to give you phytoplankton growth there.
Yes.
And then it'll go down, and which is what makes you happy. You want it to go down.
Yes, exactly. And the other thing that's being discovered now is that you need nitrogen. Plants need nitrogen. That's why you put it in nitrogen fertilizer, urea, and all these things. Mm-hmm. And in the ocean, the bacteria and organisms that fix the nitrogen, that take nitrogen from the air and turns it into nitrates in the water, they take a lot of energy, and they take a lot of iron. And so you have to have a higher sustained level of iron to enable the nitrogen production. Because without the nitrogen production, even if you have a moderate level of iron, you'll then deplete the nitrogen. And if there's not enough iron to fuel the nitrogen fixing, then after a month or so, that's the end of it. So we're discovering it's a bit complicated, and we're planning to delineate this in our tests in the Philippines over the next 12 months.
Does this have any practical importance in the kinds of work that you think you're ready to do? You say you could actually deploy it at scale within 3 years.
I
That
think so,
means,
yeah.
Yeah. All these things you're talking about now sound like new wrinkles or angles that maybe, do you need to get all that worked out before you can do things on a practical level?
I think, I think among the five of us here, the answer would be no, that we can get started and then we can improve the technology as we're going, because there are a number of questions that need to be resolved. What latitudes are best? Because around 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south have big advantages, but then the direction that the wind goes, it heads towards the equator. And so there's testing that needs to be done. And then what elevation, as you brought up earlier, we've talked about doing it from ships and then from towers and then from airplanes. Well, it's easily resolved. You just do tests, and if you had $10 or $20 million, you'd be done. And so, whatever you do, we can get started on it.
And you can learn by doing. As you go along, you're going to find out answers to some of these things. And
Yes.
probably, okay.
Yes, we can get started immediately.
All right, I'm all for it. I will go see.
Oh, well, here's a question for you, Meta.
Yeah.
It is, I'm as I mentioned, MIT established their atmospheric, they're restoring the atmosphere mission, and I'm calling on them to host intergovernmental governance group. Would Canada be interested in participating in that?
Well, I can't speak for Canada. Justin Trudeau and I are not on, well, I wouldn't say speaking terms, but I have never met the man. I don't know. But I can sound out people, and we will be having, I think the Pugwashites will be having meetings with, somehow contacting people in the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, I think it's called now. And we can just find out whether but maybe there's a quicker way to do that. I'll look into it. Okay.
Yeah, look into it. Because I happened to talk to the chief scientist of the Australian Government Climate Authority yesterday. Mm-hmm. And he liked the idea of restoring the climate. It hadn't really occurred to him, that their focus is on energy. But he also is very clear that it's all about CO2 levels. Anyway, and so I'll be inviting him to participate. Canada is closer to Boston than Australia is, as you know. And so it'd be great if there were a chief scientist in Canada who could get interested and come to a meeting at MIT.
I would say I'm always disappointed when I look around for Canadians to invite to these forums, because I don't see that many Canadian researchers doing this. Maybe they're hiding. I don't know, but I can't find them. But anyway, I'll look into it and I'll get back to you, because I think it's a great idea. We've used our time now this time, and I'm very satisfied because I feel now I kind of understand what has happened lately, and it sounds good. It sounds like you're really making progress, and boy, we need it. We really need it. Bless you all. Thank you so much for the work you're doing and for being such good, wonderful friends. I've enjoyed it very much. Thanks.
And you too.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meta.
Thank you.
Bye. All.
Bye.
Bye.
Project Save the World produces these forums, and this is episode number 628. Watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. People share information there about 6 global issues, and we welcome your comments too. To find a particular talk show, check the scroll list on the homepage or use the search bar. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine, which now serves as a free of charge newsletter to help mobilize knowledge about 6 global threats to humankind. We currently email the magazine as a PDF or a link to to any interested organization of the world that works to prevent a global catastrophe involving war and weapons, global warming, famine, pandemics, radioactive contamination, or cyber risks. Just email us at office@peacemagazine.org, and we'll add your group's email address without charge to our list. For individual subscriptions at $20 Canadian per year, go to pressreader.com on your browser and search for Peace Magazine.